I think we don't talk much about extremism at all in the Canadian context.
We often think that this is an American problem. This doesn't happen in Canada.
The extreme seems to be coming closer to the mainstream.
And so we've seen some of these ideas push people into violence, and the speed at which they radicalize the violence has been quite shocking.
They see it as defensive violence, that they had to lash out, that they had to eliminate the threat by murder, by death.
The one other thing in this whole extremism conversation, in who is included, who is not included, state actors are not included.
How did we get here? Let's unravel the rise of right-wing extremism in Canada. How did we get here? Well, we've been here.
And anytime we see a country with a foundation of imperialism and colonization, we're going to have racist, often xenophobic sentiments in that country.
All right, stick with me here. Time for a mini history lesson. Exclusionary practices are one of the few constants in Canadian history. Even before the creation of Canada, the papal bulls were used to justify the seizure and occupation of land from Indigenous peoples. It underpins many of the policies and laws that continue to this day. In the 1600s, colonists enslaved Black and Indigenous people. Slavery in Canada was only abolished in 1833. In the 1840s, the province of Canada segregated Black children into separate schools. In the 1850s, the government laid the groundwork for the Indian Act, that many say was aimed at terminating Indigenous culture and society, and subjugating Indigenous people to colonial rule. In 1883, the government created the first residential schools to forcibly assimilate Indigenous children. In 1885, Canada imposed a tax on all Chinese immigrants entering the country. In the 1910s, Canada had its own branches of the KKK. In the 1930s and 40s, there was a lot of anti-Semitism. And in 1942, the internment and dispossession of Japanese Canadians. In the 1960s, there was the Scoop, forcibly removing Indigenous children from their families and placing them with white families. And the destruction of Africville, a Black community in Nova Scotia, to make way for a bridge. Skinheads in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and in the early 2000s, Canada saw a rise in Islamophobia after 9/11.
It is so important for us to think about the settler colonial history of Canada and the violence that was enacted to produce the nation state of Canada, and how it has continuously been in the business of producing who belongs and who doesn't belong as part of this nation, right?
History is filled with inflection points, times where things seem to change all at once. Sometimes you don't know you're in one until it's already happened. Let's look at 2015 and what came after. Extremism in Canada has been on a striking rise, and the number of far-right groups has tripled since 2015. And there's been an increase in the number of mass murders associated with far-right extremists.
We had the Quebec City mosque shooting that killed 6 Muslim people, then the Toronto van attack, then of course we had the London, Ontario murders. In Winnipeg, Manitoba, where someone has now been charged with 4 murders of Indigenous women.
Before we go further, let's take a look at the far-right ecosystem. Right-wing extremism isn't just white supremacy.
You have a mixture of anti-government, populist, far-right sentiment as you move into different parts of the country. You're seeing kind of the great replacement idea that white people are, under imminent threat to be replaced by immigrant populations.
There's a number of groups driving this far-right sentiment. They include neo-Nazis, incels, anti-authoritarians, ethno-nationalists, militia or patriots movements, and accelerationists.
They're intent on reversing the gains of typically marginalized communities. Increasingly, they are anti-authoritarian as well.
Across Canada, the number of reported hate crimes nearly doubled from 2018 to 2022.
I'm racist as I don't like you. I don't like her. I would kill your children first.
From 2021 to 2022, there was a 12% increase in crimes targeting race or ethnicity, as well as a 12% increase in crimes targeting sexual orientation. Additionally, a 12% increase in violent hate crimes. These include major assaults and death threats. And a 53% increase in the number of homicide victims. due to hate crimes.
In fact, if we look at Islamophobic murder specifically, we have had more than per capita than any other country.
Less than 1/3 of the hate crimes reported to police were actually solved. The Canadian Security Intelligence Service is now warning that extremists could increase their violence against the LGBTQ2S+ community through 2024.
Canada's top intelligence agency is warning that extremists could inspire and encourage violence against queer and trans people in the coming year. So yeah, when we talk about anti-LGBTQ2S+ government policies and legislation having some dangerous repercussions, this is the sort of thing we're talking about.
On the ground, the upsurge of hateful activity goes beyond what is reported to police.
And I will leap across this table and punch you right in your fucking mouth.
You're being so
all of a
racist.
sudden I'm being racist.
Yes.
I'm Canadian, so I'm racist. I was born and raised here.
We were.
You fucking
There is a major gap of what people are saying they are experiencing and what is actually coming to the justice system's attention. Those spewing such hate feel powerful. Those targeted are left feeling helpless and alone.
According to the 2019 Stats Canada survey on victimization, there were over 200,000 self-reported hate incidents that year.
But when you look at hate incidents reported to the police, for the last few years, it represents a fraction, probably about 1% of that number.
Through the General Social Survey, every 5 years, there's this portion on victimization where we simply ask people, have you been the victim of a hate crime? I would respectfully submit that every 5 years is too infrequent to collect that data.
Why are these crimes on the rise? These researchers will tell you it's not a small question.
Oof, I don't even know where to start there.
Find out more on the next episode of Unravel.